All right, welcome. Today we're going to deconstruct a map, but not just any map. This is one that was drawn up in secret, with ink made from a mix of imperial ambition and, frankly, a lot of broken promises. You see, the lines drawn over a century ago, they weren't just borders, they were fuses. And today, we're going to trace those fuses all the way back to the moment they were lit, so we can better understand the fires that are still burning across the Middle East.
So this gets us to the big question, right? Why do these borders look like they were almost perfectly engineered to create conflict? Well, to get to the bottom of it, we have to treat this map less like a given and more like a crime scene. We need to look right past those modern lines and uncover the political DNA that was baked into them by the people who drew them. Okay, so before we can even begin to understand the new map, we've got to look at what was there before. For centuries, this whole region was this complex, intricate mosaic of different peoples living under the Ottoman Empire. And the organizing principle wasn't the nation-state like we think of it today. It was the vilayet, basically a province. Your identity was local, it was religious, it was tribal. World War I was like a geopolitical earthquake that just shattered that old world, creating a massive vacuum that European powers were more than happy to rush in and fill.
All right, so let's set the scene. Picture this pre-war chessboard. Even before the first shots were fired in 1914, the Ottoman Empire was widely seen in European capitals as the sick man of Europe. It was slowly decaying, and that decay was creating a huge power vacuum. And the great powers, they weren't just watching from the sidelines. They were active players, moving their pieces into position, getting ready for the inevitable collapse.
So let's break down who the players were and what they wanted. For Britain, the calculation was incredibly simple: protect the Suez Canal. No matter what, it was the absolute lifeline to India, the crown jewel of its entire empire. France, on the other hand, had this long-standing claim as the protector of Christian communities in the Levant. Russia, they had a centuries-old dream, getting access to a warm-water port, and they were staring right at Constantinople. And then you had Germany, making moves with big economic projects like the Berlin to Baghdad Railway. This was not a stable situation. It was a tangled web of competing imperial dreams.
And then, boom! The Ottomans join the war on the side of the Central Powers, and the whole game changes. For people like Winston Churchill, the Ottoman Empire was the soft underbelly of the enemy. It was a chance, they thought, to break the horrible, bloody stalemate on the Western Front. But this new front wasn't just going to be fought with guns and soldiers, it was going to be fought with promises. And this is where we see the start of a really deliberate and ultimately catastrophic web of deceit.
The British, in particular, became absolute masters of making promises they couldn't possibly keep. They made 3 huge foundational promises about the future of the exact same land. One was to the Arabs, another to their French allies, and a third to the Zionist movement. And these weren't just vague little assurances. These were strategic moves that were completely incompatible with each other. Let's take a look at each one.
First up, the promise to the Arabs. To get an internal rebellion going against the Ottomans, the British started writing letters to Sharif Hussein of Mecca. This exchange, the McMahon-Hussein correspondence, is a masterclass in strategic ambiguity, but it dangled the ultimate prize, the real possibility of a huge, independent Arab state. And that was the spark that lit the Arab Revolt, a really crucial front against the Ottoman Empire.
But here's the kicker. At the very same time the ink was drying on those letters to Hussein, a totally different kind of deal was being made in secret. A British diplomat, Sir Mark Sykes, and his French counterpart, François-Georges Picot, were hunched over a map, doing the exact opposite of what was promised to the Arabs. They were literally carving up the very lands that had just been offered up for independence.
And this is what they came up with. The Sykes-Picot Agreement was just an act of incredible imperial hubris. They drew that infamous line in the sand, running pretty much from the E in Acre to the last K in Kirkuk. Everything north of it, French influence. Everything south, British. I mean, just notice the complete and utter disregard for any existing ethnic groups, religions, or tribal geography. This was just map-making as an exercise in pure power.
You know, this level of arrogance wasn't lost on everyone. As Brigadier General McDonough said at the time, they were, quote, like hunters who divided up the skin of the bear before they had killed it. That quote just perfectly captures the mindset here. The spoils were already being divvied up, all based on a victory that hadn't even happened yet.
And then, just when you think it can't get any more complicated, they throw in promise number 3, and this one might be the most consequential of all. In 1917, the Balfour Declaration committed the British government to supporting the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. Now, the strategy here was to win support from the Jewish diaspora around the world for the Allied war effort, but look at what this created. Palestine was now part of a promised Arab state, it was supposed to be under international control according to Sykes-Picot, and now it was also promised as a national home for the Jewish people. The stage was absolutely set for a conflict that was, well, inevitable.
Okay, so the war finally ends. The dust settles. And now all these secret wartime deals had to come out into the light, right at the peace conferences. And they immediately smashed head-on into this powerful new idea being pushed by U.S. President Woodrow Wilson, national self-determination. This created a huge PR problem for Britain and France. How on earth could they implement their imperial land grab in a world that was supposedly being rebuilt on the idea of letting people choose for themselves?
The solution was, I have to admit, a stroke of diplomatic genius. It was called the Mandate System. So under the banner of the brand new League of Nations, Britain and France wouldn't be colonizers. Oh no, they would be mentors, guiding these territories that were not yet able to stand by themselves toward eventual independence. In reality, it was just a fig leaf. It was the Sykes-Picot Agreement just cleaned up and run through the wash of international law. It was colonialism with a new, friendlier name.
The creation of Iraq is the perfect case study for this whole mess. The British just took 3 completely different Ottoman vilayets: Mosul, which was mostly Kurdish, Baghdad, mostly Sunni Arab, and Basra, mostly Shia Arab, and just smashed them together into a single country. This artificial creation forced these historic, culturally distinct groups into one political box, creating a state with built-in sectarian fault lines that, as we know, are still there today.
And the French? They were playing the exact same game. To protect their own interests, they carved Greater Lebanon out of historical Syria. Why? To create a new state with a delicate Christian majority they could control. This bit of political surgery didn't just plant the seeds for Lebanon's own devastating civil wars, but it also created a lasting grudge for Syria, which has never really fully accepted the separation.
So, when you step back and look at the big picture, what's the ultimate legacy of all this map-making? Well, it's an inheritance of deep, profound instability. The post-war settlement created a bunch of states that just lacked any organic national identity. Their borders were arbitrary, their governments were often seen as being put there by foreigners, and their populations were this volatile mix of divided communities and old rivals all trapped together.
And then, just to pour gasoline on this political fire, along comes oil. And what's really crucial here is that the major discoveries, like the one in Iraq in 1927, happened after these random borders were already drawn. So by pure chance, the lines on the map had locked away immense wealth in the lands of specific ethnic or religious groups. In Iraq, the oil was mainly in the Kurdish and Shia areas, not the traditional Sunni center of power. This created what's often called the resource curse, a toxic situation where controlling the government isn't about governing, it's about a zero-sum battle for control of the nation's entire money spigot.
And amidst all this high-level politics, we can't forget the real human cost. In Palestine, those impossible contradictory promises made during the war finally came to a head. The 1948 war, right after the State of Israel was established, led to the displacement of an estimated 700,000 Palestinian Arabs, an event that's known in Arabic as the Nakba, or the catastrophe. This refugee crisis is a direct, painful, and enduring legacy of those wartime deals.
And what you're left with is the political landscape we all see today. It's defined by stateless peoples, especially the Kurds, whose homeland was chopped up and scattered across 4 new countries, denying them the very self-determination that was promised to others. It's given us fragmented states like Iraq and Syria, where internal conflicts are a direct echo of the way these groups were artificially crammed together a century ago. And it just keeps fueling endless conflict over resources and the legitimacy of the borders themselves.
Which really brings us all the way back to where we started. When you draw lines on a map based on imperial convenience instead of human geography, what have you created? Are they borders or are they fuses? I think the evidence speaks for itself. The map of the modern Middle East is a tragic reminder that history isn't something that's over and done with. It is the very architecture of the conflicts we live with today.